Uh, in case there's anyone new here, I'll just mention my name's Zach. I have the privilege of being the young adults pastor here at New Vine, and as Matt mentioned, I'm here to share about a culture of invitation here at New Vine, and I'm really excited about that. I'm here this morning. I'm here standing in front of you because I was invited. And I don't just mean that I was invited to speak this morning, although that's true. And I also don't just mean that I was invited to join New Vine just a couple of years ago, although that's true. In fact, I think it's this week, 2 years ago, that Grace and I joined New Vine. And so I'm happy about that. I'm celebrating that. It is good news for us because we've just loved being a part of this church. We've loved getting to know more and more people, and excited to and grateful to be part of this church. And so 2 years, it flies by. But I don't just mean that 2 years ago I was invited here. 17 years ago, I was invited to a youth group in Madawi. It was in a time in life when I was feeling, I was a teenager, so maybe this is true of a lot of teenagers, but I was feeling really lonely and disconnected, and I felt like I hadn't really found my people yet. And I was invited to go along to this youth group. Sounded pretty fun. There were games and people, and I like both of those things. So it sounded like a good thing to get along to. Now, as it happens, the guy who invited me along to the youth group wasn't actually at the youth group. He wasn't a leader there, or he wasn't there on Friday nights. So I went along, and I didn't know anyone. When I went along on a Friday night to this youth group, I'm pretty sure the first night was an outing to ice skating. And I remember getting on the bus and not knowing anyone. And I'm sure you probably know this feeling where you enter a room and you're kind of scanning around to try and find a face that you recognize. And this was me getting on the bus. I was like quickly trying to find at least someone that I recognize, and if not, a spare seat so I can just kind of hide there or whatever. But before I even had a chance to find a seat, someone invited me. Someone reached out to me and said, introduced themselves, asked my name, and then introduced me to a whole bunch of other people who were there on the bus, and welcomed me in. And I ended up having such a great night because I was invited, because I was welcomed. Now, let me make something clear here. I look back on that situation really positively, and it was a really good time. But I'm also confident that there would have been plenty of awkward silences. There would have been plenty of times where I didn't really know what to say, and they didn't really know what to ask. And that doesn't change the fact, though, that invitation had an impact on me. That invitation made me want to go back to youth group again and again and again and again. What I remember from that time is being invited. What I remember from that time is being welcomed in. I don't remember the awkward silences, even though I'm confident that they happened. And so from there, of course, I kept going along to youth, and I started going along to church as well. And again, I remember a whole bunch of people inviting me. There were a bunch of the young people at the church would often head out to lunch after church to a pizza place down the road. And it was not long before they started inviting me along to, hey, Zach, do you want to come grab pizza after church? And I was welcomed in. I barely even knew these people, and yet they were welcoming me in. They were inviting me along to their events. And other times they would invite me over to their homes. We'd play games or go for a swim or whatever it was, watch a movie. They were inviting me. Now, I want you to notice something about these things. They're not really that profound. This is lunch out after church. This is coming over for games or a swim. This is nothing too deep, but nevertheless, it made me feel wanted. It made me feel welcomed. It made me feel invited. And it wasn't long before I started connecting the dots. It wasn't long before I started to realize that these aren't just really nice and welcoming people. I mean, they were nice and welcoming, but there was more going on. There was something more going on just below the surface. I started to realize that these people were welcoming and invitational because they were following a God who is welcoming and invitational. They were emulating the God they worshipped. They were shaped by and formed by the God of invitation. And so at the moment, we're doing this series called New Vine by Design. And it's about how some things, we do in life, we do them by default. It's just the way we do things. I don't know. It's just what we do. And that's culture. But culture can be by default, or culture can be set by design. And here at New Vine, we want our culture to be by design. And as I speak about this culture of invitation, this is part of what we want the design, the DNA of New Vine to be. But I also want to recognize something really important right at the outset here. And I want to acknowledge that this is New Vine not merely by our design. This is New Vine. These things, this culture, these are not just our grand ideas. These aren't just the things that we want to do. This is not just New Vine by our design. This is New Vine by God's design. Because our God is the God of invitation. Our God is the God who welcomes the outsiders in. Our God is the God who seeks and saves the lost. Our God is the God who came for the least, the last, and the lost, those on the edges of society, those who would normally not be welcomed in. He welcomes them in, invites them into the center. Our God is the God who says to those who are curious, "Come and you will see." And that's exactly what we're going to talk about this morning. As I talk about this culture of invitation, I want to share some reflections on a passage from very early on in Jesus' ministry. You can find it in John chapter 1, starting in verse 35. I'll also have it on the screen in just a moment. But this passage from early on in Jesus' ministry, it's like this lived parable that is worth reflecting on. It's from, again, the earliest days of Jesus' ministry, this time when he was calling his first disciples. And I just want us to start, before I read the passage, I just want us to start by imagining, what would that have been like? What would it have been like to be those earliest disciples? As Jesus is beginning his ministry, as he's calling them, imagine what these early disciples would have been thinking and feeling and anticipating. I mean, these are people who they have been praying and longing and hoping for God to send someone, for God to send the Messiah, God to send a king who would rescue them from the mess that they find themselves in. Generation after generation after generation, they have been longing for this. And then there's this guy who rocks up before Jesus, a guy named John. And this John is wild and weird, eats all kinds of food you wouldn't want to eat, and he's out living in the desert, and he's calling people out into the desert, into the wilderness, into the place that hundreds of years ago God had called his people originally. He's calling them to come out with him to the desert and to repent, to turn back to God. That's what repentance means, to turn back to God. To get off their windy and crooked paths and to make straight the way of the Lord. So he's calling these people to go out, and a lot of people are really captured by this guy, John. They go out there and they're being baptized by him, and many people started following him and becoming his disciples. And a couple of his disciples soon began to realize that John is really just a signpost. He is the one who is pointing towards someone even greater than himself. And that's where our passage starts. That's kind of the scene that's set. But as I read this, I want us to imagine, again, what might this have been like for these disciples? As I've been reflecting on this passage, I find it quite exciting. Like, man, this would have been so much momentum would have been built at this time. So my hope is that you can get that same kind of feeling that I've had as I've been reading over this. So let me read. So this is John chapter 1, verses 35 to 46. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard this, they started following Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" And he said, "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and they saw where he was staying and they spent the day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon's brother, was one of the two who had heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was find his brother Simon and tell him, "We've found the Messiah." That is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We've found the one Moses wrote about in the law, about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. All right, so again, you can kind of hopefully feel the excitement and anticipation and kind of curiosity in this passage. Jesus, he calls Andrew, who then calls his brother Simon, who then gets a name change. Jesus calls Philip, who then finds Nathanael, who invites him to come and see. There's this momentum that's being built all around Jesus. And so this morning, I just have a few reflections that I want to share about these interactions that are happening in this passage and what they have to do with this culture of invitation that we're hoping to build here at New Vine. And it's all centered around the invitation that Jesus first gives and the invitation that then Philip copies. And it's this invitation to come and see. I think this is a great model for us to follow. What would it look like for us to be a come and see kind of people? What would it look like for us to be a come and see community? What would it look like for people in our community, in our broader community, to know us as a come and see community? When they think of us, what would it be like if they thought of an open-handed invitation? I think that would be really great. And there's the reflections that I have is first, what I think this looks like is I think that this looks like invitation through relationship. See, the disciples asked Jesus where he was staying, and he invites them. He said, "Come and see." He invites them to come and see where he's staying. He invites them to spend the day with him. He invites them into relationship, right? This is a pattern that we see in Jesus' ministry, all throughout Jesus' ministry. He loves to build relationships. It's my kind of person. See, here the disciples, they stay with Jesus for that day, but there's going to be many, many more days that the disciples spend with Jesus, isn't there? There's going to be many, many more times as the disciples start to follow him around and travel around with him from town to town to town. He's going to continue to stay with him, with them, and they with him. But it's not just the disciples. In a few chapters' time, Jesus is going to have this encounter with a woman of Samaria, and she gets so impacted by Jesus that then she goes off to her village and tells everyone about Jesus. And it just adds this little line at the end, this is in John chapter 4, that Jesus stayed there for 3 days. So Jesus is going to continue to stay with people. He's going to continue to do relationship with people. We see this as well as Jesus has so many meals with people. He shares table with people who have such a poor reputation. The people you wouldn't really want to be associated with. Jesus decides to eat with them and to build relationship with them. This is invitation through relationship. So all throughout Jesus' ministry, we see this pattern that Jesus stays with people. He stays, he remains. This is actually a really important word in John's gospel, to stay or to remain. In fact, John's gospel, so we've got the 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In John's gospel, he uses this word remain more than any other book in the New Testament. It comes up again and again and again. And it becomes really important in chapter 15 when Jesus shares this image of what his disciples are to do. He uses this image of a vine with branches. And Jesus says to his disciples, I'm the vine, you are the branches, and you are to remain in me. If you remain in me and I in you, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. See, this is another invitation to relationship. So it's almost like here at the start, the disciples are asking Jesus, where are you staying? Where are you remaining? And then later on, Jesus is going to flip the script and he's going to ask them, where are you remaining? Where are you staying? And I think both questions are really important. We are to be a people, if we're to be a come and see kind of people, then we are to be people who remain in relationship with others and who remain in relationship with God. We remain with God because he is our life source. Apart from him, we can't do anything. He is the one who makes us aware of other people. He's the one who, by his Spirit, gives us these little promptings of something to say or something to ask or a thing to do that is going to make an impact on those around us. We need to remain in God, remain with God. We also remain with people because people are not projects. People aren't just numbers to bolster our events or our attendance or anything like that. These people are people who we're called to love, people that we're called to be in relationship with. We're called to build relationships with people and to remain with them in their doubts and in their faith, in their excitement and in their skepticism, in the good times and in the hard times. A culture of invitation shaped by the way of Jesus is invitation through relationship. And even when people say no to our invitation, we are to remain with them in relationship. The other thing that I've reflected on this passage is that this is an invitation to curiosity. See, when Philip goes to Nathanael and says that we found the one that Moses and the prophets wrote about, Nathanael's first comment is, can anything good come from Nazareth? Now, as someone who lives in Raymond Terrace, I feel this. This literally hits close to home for me. Yes, good things can come from Nazareth and Raymond Terrace. Amen, yes. So Nazareth is kind of this small, insignificant town. And so maybe like Ramo, people in the wider regions who kind of know about it, who are also small towns, but not quite as small, not quite as insignificant, it seems like what was happening was people in the other regions would look down on this small town of Nazareth. So Nathanael was from Cana, that is also a small town, but not quite as small and humble as Nazareth. And so it seems like the local attitude would have been something like, yeah, I'm from Cana, but at least I'm not from Nazareth. I mean, can anything good come from Nazareth? Like, it might have even been a common saying among the people. I'm just speculating here, but it might have been a common saying that he was using. But regardless of any of that, what I want to pay attention to is Philip's response, right? Because Philip is following the pattern that Jesus has already established to invite Nathanael to come and see. Nathanael's a bit skeptical, but Philip doesn't shut it down. He doesn't correct Nathanael. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to tidy up Jesus' reputation or anything like that. I actually think it's really wise the way that he responds. He repeats what Jesus says, and he invites Nathanael to come and see and experience Jesus for himself. See, I reckon that very few, if any, people come to the kingdom through argument. Rather, I think most, if not all people, come to the kingdom through invitation. And I think the ultimate kingdom invitation is simply come and see for yourself. Come and see what it's like. It's an invitation to be curious. So yeah, people might say, I don't know if this is for me. Can anything come from church? Can anything good come from church? But I think sometimes, and maybe most of the time, the best response we can give to those kinds of questions is, hey, come and see. I think it's as simple as that. See, Philip trusts Jesus. Philip trusts that Jesus can handle Nathanael's questions. He trusts that he can handle his skepticism. He trusts that an encounter with Jesus is going to do far more than any explanation ever could anyway. And I think that we're called to be the same kind of community, the community that invites people to be curious, to make space for people's questions, but to not try to answer it all up front. To invite people, just come and see for yourself. Where people are free to bring their questions, bring themselves, their skepticism, whatever it might be, and just come and see. Because Jesus is not fragile. Jesus doesn't need some kind of protection. We can say, come and see. We're not asking people to switch their brains off. We're just asking them to lean in, to wonder, to be curious. And we're trusting that Jesus can do far more than what we can do anyway. So I think it looks like an invitation to be curious. Finally, the last one that I want to share about is that I think this is an invitation for people to see Jesus. And to see Jesus, not to see us and how good we are and how good of a program we can put on or something like this. This is good news, right? The good news is that it's not ultimately about us. When Philip says to Nathanael, come and see, what he's really saying is come and see Jesus. We're not saying come and see how impressive we are. Come and see how, put together our community is, or come and see how good our answers are, or how good our preaching is, or anything like that. We're saying come and see Jesus. Jesus is awesome. And I think that's freeing because the weight of transformation doesn't rest on us. Doesn't rest on our ability to make it happen. We're not responsible for convincing or converting or controlling the outcomes. It's all about Jesus and what he can do over and above us and our efforts. And we still want to, I think we've got great things going on here, and I'm so grateful for it. And I, for one, want to continue to put in effort to ensure that this is a great community. But the good news is that Jesus goes above and beyond what we can do. But I also want to acknowledge a bit of a difference between the time of Philip and Nathanael and the time that we find ourselves in today, right? Because Philip took Nathanael to literally come and see Jesus, the physical Jesus who was eating fish and I imagine cracking jokes. That's something that, in terms of the physical Jesus, that's something that we can't do today. Today, people encounter Jesus through his people, through us, through ordinary, imperfect, messy people, but also people who are led by the Spirit of Jesus, people who are empowered by the Spirit of Jesus. As we say yes to Jesus, Jesus is faithful to give us his Spirit to empower us to become more and more and more like him. And so people are able to encounter Jesus through us. So while the invitation is not about us, it still involves us. God, in his wisdom, has chosen to partner with humanity. And so people see Jesus through us in the way that we welcome, in the way that we invite, in the way that we listen, in the way that we're just present with people. That was my experience. When I first started coming along to church and I had all these people inviting me, welcoming me into all the different activities that were going on, like I said earlier, I started to realize there's more going on here. There is a God who is behind the love and welcome that I'm experiencing. And so it's like our lives become the context that people are invited to see Jesus. And I think that should be humbling and hopeful as well, because again, it's more about what God can do over and above us rather than what we can do in ourselves. And I'm just so grateful that God chooses to partner with people who are messy in order to reveal himself to others. And I'm also grateful that it's by his Spirit that slowly, gradually, as we continue to, as Matt shared earlier, yield ourselves to the Spirit, as we continue to do that, God is able to impact the world. And so we invite not just pointing to ourselves, but trusting that through us, people might catch a glimpse of what Jesus is like. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now. I want to invite up the worship team as I come to a close. And as I share about that time earlier, that time in life when I started coming along to church, I started going along to youth and then church, and I was getting all these invitations. I don't want it to come across like this was just this perfect, amazing time where I just felt love and connection, all that kind of thing constantly. I did feel that, but there were also times where I felt a bit disconnected. There were times where I had heaps of invitations and I felt really connected, but there were also times where I felt disconnected and I felt like not as much a part of the community as I had at the start. And I remember during one of those times, God challenged me. God encouraged me during one of those times by saying that if I want to be connected, then sometimes I need to make connections. See, sometimes if you're longing for that invite, if you're longing for that event, maybe that's your sign to send that invite. Maybe that's your sign to make that event, to make those connections. And it can be really scary and draining, but it can also be really rewarding and wonderful. It's probably worth just acknowledging, I guess. I do realize if you've spoken to me for more than 30 seconds, you know I'm quite extroverted. So I'm not saying that this is equally scary or draining as one another. There are some things in the Christian life that I'm going to find more difficult than you, and there are some things that you might find more difficult than me. But I think we're all invited to, at times, step out and make those connections. Whether it's life groups or inviting someone along to Alpha, inviting someone just along to your home. I think that we're all called to do this kind of thing. Because the good news is, and especially for those who are in our community, here's something really important, I think, to know. As I reflect on it, I realized God was inviting me far before I was invited to the youth group. God was already at work in my heart. God was already at work drawing me closer to himself. And I might not have recognized it at the time, or I might not have just had the words to describe what was going on at the time, but I know that that's what was happening underneath the surface. And God is still at work today. Did you know this? God is still at work today, inviting people, prepping people to say yes to the invitations that we put out. I had the privilege of being at a celebration dinner at the end of last year for a bunch of the churches in the region. And there was a guy there who was sharing his testimony. He had been reading the Bible and listening to God before he was invited to church. God is at work. God is doing good things in our community, and we can welcome people into what God's doing. So very simply, as we enter into a time of worship, could I encourage you to ask this question: who is God calling you to invite? We've got Alpha coming up for those who don't yet know Jesus, who haven't yet said yes to Jesus, or maybe for those who have just recently said yes to Jesus and still have so much to learn. Alpha's a great thing to invite people to. Maybe for some of you here today, Alpha's a great thing for you to attend if you're new to the faith. So who is God calling you to invite? Maybe it's invite to church, to one of our Easter services in a few months' time. Maybe to if they're a young adult, maybe to a young adults camp. Maybe it's just to your home. Maybe it can be as simple as that, or lunch out after church. Who is God calling you to invite? I invite you to ask that question as we enter into a time of worship. So let me pray and then we'll do that. God, I thank you that you are the God of invitation, that you are the God who welcomes in the outsiders. You are the God who seeks the least, the last, the lost, those on the edges of society. May we be a people who reflect you and your character. May New Vine be by design be New Vine by your design, God. I just thank you for who you are and who you are making us to be. I pray that you would continue to work this morning, today, and for the rest of the week. I pray this in your name. Amen.